Hello, everyone. Welcome to Asian Insider, and I'm Ravi Velloor. My guest today is the distinguished economist and geopolitical analyst Manu Bhaskaran, and we're going to discuss the impact of a flood of Chinese goods into Southeast Asia. Some people call this the second China shock. It's a phenomenon that has started to bother many countries in the world. In fact, this year's Munich Security Conference warned that the second China shock could wipe out European industry. Now there are concerns that this flood of Chinese goods may do the same to industries in Southeast Asia. The Chinese, I'm told, are even making batik shirts and selling them into Indonesia. Now, all this has huge implications for our region, and there's no better person to give us a broad view of this phenomenon than Mr. Manu Bhaskaran, who is a partner and member of the board of Centennial Group. The Centennial Group is a policy advisory firm based in Washington, D.C. In his early years, Mr. Bhaskaran worked at Singapore's Ministry of Defense, focusing on regional security and strategic issues. He then became a private sector economist, and today, among the many things he does, including sitting on company boards, he's also an Adjunct Fellow at the Institute of Policy Studies in Singapore. Welcome to Asian Insider, Manu.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Manu, there's all this talk of the second China shock.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what this really means? What's it all about?
I think what people mean is this surge of Chinese exports into third markets. This has actually been going on for some time. It's been, began a long time ago, but it takes greater salience now with the trade war. And the fear is that the U.S. tariffs will cause a diversion of even more Chinese exports to other markets that still are open to China. And the fear is that this will swamp those markets and create a lot of ructions in local industry, small mom-and-pop shops, and so on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if there is a second China shock, what was the first China shock? A lot of people are not too clear about what that really was.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's good to know the context, right? China entered the WTO now, 25 years ago, and not a single economist, none of us got it right. The incredible surge of Chinese competitiveness, manufacturing capacity, innovation took everyone by surprise. If you're Taiwan or South Korea and that happens, that's at one level. But China is huge. And whatever it does has an outsized effect on the rest of the world. And that is something none of us expected. So China's surge of exports, in many ways, of course, it is good because it provides low-cost goods efficiently and of a very good quality and improving quality. But it also has disruptive effects on domestic industries. And the larger you're China, not a Korea or Hong Kong, the dislocation costs can be quite politically damaging.
Mm-hmm. So the second China shock is not really hype. It is an actual phenomenon.
Absolutely, it is happening. Chile's last remaining steel company almost went bust. Indonesia's largest textile company actually went bust. This is real.
Mm-hmm. Given that we're so intertwined with the Chinese economy these days, and there's talk that we're going to, ASEAN exports are going to touch about $1 trillion very soon with China. Is this surge in Chinese trading or export activity, is that a net positive for the region, especially with the Chinese supply chains being so diversified lately?
It's a complex story, right? I mean, I think the way the trade war is going, even with the good news about Mr. Trump speaking to Mr. Xi and all that, if you look through the noise, I mean, clearly at the end of the day, say in X months' time, U.S. tariffs are going to be much higher than they were pre-Trump. China will probably be hit harder by those tariffs than other countries, which means that there is still a case for moving production from China to other countries. And those other countries are probably going to be Southeast Asia, Mexico, maybe to some extent India. Mm-hmm. So there will be a benefit in terms of production, foreign investment that comes along with it. And that could be a positive. So that's the impact of the trade war. Now, China, on the other hand, and this is there are two big shocks happening in the world trade context today. One is the U.S. tariffs, and the other is what China is doing in terms of growing its exports. So the second shock, which is from China, is going to get worse because the way a manufacturing investment is going in China, growing rapidly, And given domestic demand is weak, a lot of that new production capacity will result in exports. So you ain't seen nothing yet in terms of the export surges into these markets. And like I said, given the size of China, it is going to be disruptive. So that's the negative.
Well, China exports about half its manufacturing output. Now, I was at the Chison conference last year where I heard a investor who's got a Western investor who's got fairly big investments in China. He described China as the fitness center of global manufacturing. Now, would it not be fair to say that if these guys are really doing it so efficiently, that they deserve the markets that they can get? What would you say to that?
Oh, I think there's some truth to that. China's comparative advantage is not just low labor costs anymore. It is that phenomenal ecosystem that they've built, where you have these extremely competitive industries where component suppliers vie against each other, constantly cutting costs, improving quality, improving timeliness, and so on. And very few ecosystems around the world match that. So in a way, yes, China deserves gaining export market share. But the trouble, like I said, is it's huge. When it gains even 1 or 2 percentage points of global exports, somebody has to lose. It's a zero-sum game. And when somebody loses, there are political consequences. So say what you want about fairness or not. When your largest steel company goes bust, whether you want to be a friend of China or not, you will impose some kind of restriction on Chinese exports. If your largest textile company goes bust or is about to, you will do something about it. You have to. And that's the situation we are in. It's not a question of fairness or not. It's a question of practical politics.
So when you look around our region in Southeast Asia, what are the countries most at risk and what are the industries most at risk, Manu?
I think right now what's happening is it goes beyond industries. So for instance, the surge of Temu and Shein and these small items, that is beginning to affect small mom and pop shops in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia. That's arousing a political response. So it's not just about sectors and goods, particular goods. It's about whole classes of entrepreneurs being affected.
What about specific industries? You mentioned the textile industry in Indonesia.
Yes, I think steel and textiles clearly have.
But what about Thailand? Thailand's a big manufacturing center for auto industry particularly. Do you see any impact on Thailand, Malaysia?
Huge. Thailand is still very much dominated by internal combustion engine, but the big growth has been in electrical vehicles. They allowed BYD and so on to come into the market with the proviso that eventually they move production to Thailand. But in the interim, the ICE sales have really been devastated. And that's having a tremendously negative effect on auto production in Thailand, which is a sizable part of their manufacturing sector.
At the Munich Security Conference report this year, that report warns about that the second China shock could actually wipe out European manufacturing industry. Are things that bad for Southeast Asia, or do we have some comparative advantages such as labor, cheap labor, for instance?
Well, as I mentioned, it's no longer about low labor costs. It's about the ecosystem. And while Southeast Asia has some ecosystems such as the Penang Kulim or the Iskandar region in Malaysia or the Eastern Economic Corridor in Thailand, which are pretty globally competitive, even they are struggling, I think. They will struggle a bit, I think, to fend off Chinese competition in particular sectors. So I think it is going to be difficult, and ASEAN will need to get its act together in many ways.
Do you think there's enough realization within ASEAN about this phenomenon? And do you think ASEAN should take it up as a bloc?
To expect ASEAN to pull off something collectively is really a challenge these days. ASEAN is marked by divergent interests. And it is difficult to produce a consensus. And as you know, ASEAN operates on consensus. To be honest, I just don't see how ASEAN collectively can do something, although that should be the optimal response.
Manu, this Chinese manufacturing surge and the so-called China shock, second China shock, could it be actually affecting industries within China itself? I see, for instance, that companies like SAIC, which makes the MG cars, which are quite popular in Singapore, before BYD came and swept the market. Are they being affected also? Is China as much affected by the China shock as anybody else?
It's always been the case. It is extremely competitive within China, and it's merciless competition. And that's why China is so incredibly cost efficient and gaining market share. And so what you're seeing in the EV space is what has been happening in many other industries, where if you're even slightly less competitive than the other, you get destroyed, right? People are constantly finding ways to improve their edge over the others.
When you follow geopolitics quite closely, and people come to you for your thoughts on various things related to the geopolitics of this region, how does this manufacturing surge from China fit into the larger geopolitical winds that are blowing across this part of the world? And what do you think will be its effects?
Ravi, you're absolutely right. We cannot escape the politics of this, right? And what we are seeing is that even friends of China in the global south are finding it really difficult to absorb these shocks from Chinese exports. I mean, the people imposing restrictions on Chinese exports are not just the US and Europe. It's Turkey, it's South Africa, it's Brazil, it's even Russia, right? Thailand, Indonesia.
Even Russia?
Yes, even Russia. On auto exports, they have been actually quite hard on China. So you can see there is that political dimension where political elites in different countries want to be friends of China, but the domestic situation they face compels them to become quite hard on Chinese exports. And this is something I think Chinese policymakers will have to look at very, very carefully.
Do you think that could potentially lead to a wave of protectionism to safeguard domestic industry? Because, we already know that across ASEAN, non-tariff barriers have been going up rather than going down.
That's right.
Do you fear that could happen? And what would that mean for something like the RCEP?
It's already happening. Indonesia's placed restrictions on Chinese exports. Thailand's done the same thing. Malaysia's done the same thing. Vietnam, anti-dumping, increased tariffs, all kinds of measures have been brought. And this, like I said, is just the beginning, right? So I think it's going to get worse. And I think you're right. It raises question marks over the key trade agreements that we have. It's not just RCEP, but also the ASEAN-China trade agreement, which is being upgraded. But a lot of people are saying, well, clearly the safeguards in that agreement are not working. So there's going to be pressure to rethink this, but I think it's going to be very difficult to renegotiate.
I see. ASEAN's share of global exports have sort of stagnated at around 7.8% in the last 5 years. Why have they been so stagnant? What is it that we are not able to improve that share of global trade?
Well, the way I look at it is if you're stagnant while China is raising its share, then you're actually doing well because somebody else is clearly losing, right? So the fact that you have not lost means that you have some element of competitiveness. And I think that's important to bear in mind. A lot of people see the future of ASEAN in terms of gaining foreign direct investment, all this production being moved out of China, as a product of the problems China is having with the United States. But I think it goes beyond that. I think we should remember that in the last 10 years, ASEAN countries have actually been working hard to improve their fundamentals. Infrastructure bottlenecks have eased. Caps on foreign investment have been liberalized. Labor markets have been deregulated. Ease of doing business has improved. And people are recognizing that ASEAN is a growth pole. Its spending power is going to increase, and it is going to be attractive in its own right, not just because China is doing badly. So I think actually ASEAN has problems, but ASEAN also has quite a lot of things going for it.
It's good to know that we are getting some things right. What could we do better to reduce this productivity gap with China?
We have the ASEAN Economic Community, which, with all due respect, has not had much effect in terms of moving the needle, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, the whole point of a properly functioning agreement like that is to allow companies to consolidate production, gain economies of scale, increase market access, and so on. And that's not happening. Mm-hmm. And clearly, non-tariff barriers and other kinds of barriers are still operating. Mm-hmm. And until the political elites in ASEAN come to terms with that and are prepared to make short-term sacrifices to promote the longer-term good, we are not going to see an improvement.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, Manu, the other day I was talking to a very senior economist in AMRO, and he was joking that maybe ASEAN's competitiveness will be in the tourism sector and maybe some things like massage parlors and all that. I mean, of course, he was joking. But what would you say to that comment?
Clearly, I mean, we have an edge in tourism, but I think it goes beyond that. I think the Penang-Kulim corridor and Iskandar region are some of the most competitive places in the world for the kinds of things they do. Electronics, contract manufacturing, different stages of the semiconductor supply chain. I have spoken to multinational companies that tell me that their studies show that no other place on earth, including China or Vietnam or whatever, can come close to competing with those ecosystems. So, decades of foreign investment and building up a good ecosystem of component suppliers, good logistics, good infrastructure, of governments, both local and federal, that understand what foreign investors need, have produced a very good outcome.
Manu Bhaskaran, thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you.
I'm Ravi Velloor. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and family. And if you'd like to read my articles, we have links in our show notes below.